Hi everyone, and welcome to this AVA Online Learning Week session on preparing a design for conventional printing. For the next 20 minutes, I, Nick Hope, will be taking you through some of the tools and features and also steps which were involved in preparing your design for conventional screen or cylinder printing. So what is conventional printing? Well, conventional printing, or sometimes called traditional printing, is pairing separated screens, so individual screens for individual colours of a design, and processing those through a large industrial press. So each of these colour screens actually has its own unit and applies the ink through quite often a roller process, like you can see here with the cylinders, directly onto the actual substrate, which could be fabric or paper, depending on what industry you're actually in. I've put together some example pictures here. We have a range of cylinders here on the left hand side for various types of traditional print, and these cylinders are essentially the design information for each colour of a design, which are quite often laser engraved into special metals and materials to produce a cylinder which can be rolled via an ink tray directly onto the substrate which you're printing on in your industry. And you can see a picture at the top here of a typical rotogravure printer and its various stations for each colour. So let's dive straight in and look at our first part of the section, which is about separations. So the tool I'm going to look at today, which gives you a really good overview of the separation process and also some of the powerful control that you have over separation, is Advanced Colour, which is a very popular tool for doing separations in general. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pipette out the actual colour layers I feel I'm going to need to break this design into. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and we'll take some of these layers out. So let's grab I'm going to take a black, and I'm going to take an olive there. We'll take a bit of a cyan there, maybe a little bit of a lighter version of the cyan there in case we need it. And we're going to go and we're going to grab some purples from here. So there's a light one and there's a dark one in there. And we're going to grab orange from there, red, a bit of a dark red there, an orange from there, and obviously these lighter greens sort of come into play as well in these areas, and there's also a pink in there as well. I mean, it really doesn't matter how many layers we go for at this particular stage, because we're always going to be able to combine these layers back down to say combine these two cyans together later on. So at the minute these layers are all blank, they're ready to be separated into. If I click plus here, that creates what we call a split window. Now the split window is fantastic. It allows us to physically see certain layers on certain windows. So for example, we can show the image on the left hand side here. So I can just see the image over there, and on this side here, what I can actually do is turn that image off, and then I'll be able to see what happens when the separations start to appear against the original image on the left. So I'm always making that comparison while I'm doing the separation. With the split window set up, and we're going to come to the advanced colour window, and after a few seconds we already see a separation occurring. Now if I click on the right and just show you quickly, we can see already that has started to separate. The separations aren't perfect, but we're going to adjust those now. So if we take this just this individual cyan layer, if we now just increase the scale, which basically pushes the colour towards more of the colour that I've actually picked on the layer, what we can see is that has cleaned that background up quite a bit. And there, within a few minutes, we have something which is looking pretty close to the original. So it obviously needs more work, but it just shows you how quickly you can get to a good stable point in a separation. And then that leaves me now with a range of tonal layers which I can use for my separations and engraving process for conventional print. So with the bare bones of the separation in place, we now have a design which is separated into 11 layers. Now for conventional printing, you may find that you cannot use that number of screens to create the design on the fabric or paper that you're actually printing to. So we're going to need to look to reduce and balance this separation up into less layers, and we're also going to need to look at the way that the actual colours interact when they fall on top of each other as well. And we have a very unique tool in AVA called Combine to Layer, which allows you to have complete control over where the information overlays one another and how many layers you actually have in this finished separation of the design. So the separation so far is looking pretty good. We now need to look at tidying up this and balancing up the separation, not only in its tonal weight and where some of these tones would actually fall on to one another within the actual separation itself, which is an important part of balancing up a design for the conventional process, but also where we have 11 layers or channels at this time. We might only be able to print, for example, say up to 7 or 8 colours, or sometimes up to 12 colours on the actual traditional press, the conventional press itself. So we need to look at reducing some of these layers down. There's lots of actual control here for controlling tones within layers and using it to combine or remove tones from certain layers themselves. Now, the Combine to Layer works on individual layers at a time, and I just want to pay particular attention in this just to give you an idea of what this is going to do in this area here. Now, if we look over on the left, which is our original image, we can see a very nice blend of the sort of dark and black areas into the greens, whereas over on the right hand side here we can see that it looks a little bit sort of flat, and the reason for that is that during the separation, when we look at the green layer itself on its own, what we can see is physically the black information, so we can see the black information there, is actually knocking through the areas of green. And like I say, that's typical for doing your initial separations, and this tool is designed really to give you that balance. So what we're going to do is we're going to push the tones of the black into the green layer itself to create almost like a platform underneath that black layer for it to sit directly on. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just slowly slide this black slider up here on the black layer, and we can see that we're starting to fill in almost like a pad on top of that green layer. So it's combining the information from the black layer onto the green layer, and what it does, if I put the black over the top, you can see that it now creates like a blend of those two colours because we're not having that knockout of the black. So if I was to take the black information away from the separation, this is what it originally looked like, and this is now what it looks like with the Combine to Layer on there. So I can do that for any number of layers in the design, and I can also use it to minus colours from the design as well. Another great function of the Combine to Layer feature is the ability to combine 2 layers into one singular layer. Now, as we were saying before, we might want to look at reducing down the number of screens we've got here, or layers, and we can sort of see from this here that I do actually have this purple layer, I do have this blue layer here, which is a very sort of similar hue maybe within there, and quite often, you know, separation artists do have to make decisions about which colours they might need to combine to layer on the screen to try and reduce the number of screens for the conventional print run. So we're going to look here at combining these 2 layers together into one. What I can do is the purple and the blue layer, which we can see the original ones here, I'm just going to add 100% of the dark blue layer in, and we can see that appears nicely in there. And I'm going to start to bring in the lighter purple layer there as well, like that. So you can see that's created a singular layer. If we look at the original two there, so we can see that's the original two there, like that. That's eventually what it looked like, and then the new one is going to look something like this. What I'd like to talk about now is dot gain. Now, we have a feature in AVA which allows us to see what these tones or what this design will look like once it's actually put through the conventional press. Tones themselves, for example, if we look to the green layer here, we've got a lot of soft tones in here which are going to be ranging from 100% tone in the darkest areas along to sort of 50% and very light tones, 10%, 5% in the physical lighter areas. But what will actually happen when that actually gets physically printed using the cylinders or the screens on press, we have an effect which is called dot gain, where the tones are pushed past, or quite often pushed past their original point and made actually deeper and darker, which is not particularly what we want when we get expensive cylinders engraved and are running an expensive production machine. So dot gain is a way that in AVA, with some production data, so some information from the production presses, we can actually simulate the effects of the dot gain or the tone push that we're going to get on the press. This is the layer dot gain window. Now, layer dot gain or general dot gain can be applied to individual layers, or it can be applied to all layers, and it really is just, and it looks, you can see here, it looks very much like a gamma window if you use the gamma before on some of your designs. And it really is a visual representation, so it's a non-destructive push in tone or drop in tone, which will simulate how tones are actually going to be when they come to go on the press. You would normally get this information, say, from your engravers or your press people, who do various fingerprint tests of the press to gauge this information. For example, a 50% tone in the design might print more like, say, a 70% tone in the actual finished item on the traditional press. For example, 80% might even just be completely flat colour. So we really need to sort of get that information from them. But let's take the 50%. I'm going to add a little dot in here, so just click on there. That's giving me 50% of 50%. Well, what I can do is the 50%, I can now tell it to simulate that at what we said before, which was 70%. And you can see the effects of that on the screen there. So that's really pushed those tones very, very, very dark, which is not particularly what we want at this stage. But this is non-destructive. This is like an optical illusion, really. And it will allow me to just adjust the tones within these layers to balance it back up to the original image. So we'll put another quick one in there as well. There'll generally be more points than this, but we'll just do this. Let's say we push that to 40% tone like that. So that obviously puts the lower tones up, and I think we said before, sort of let's say 85% tone and above, he's just going to flatten out to 100%. So not looking particularly desirable there, but what it will allow us to do, if I just put this down at the side here, it allows me to take my gamma window and literally adjust the tones exactly to my liking. So that will allow me to come into here and literally, it's almost like a reverse curve. But if I start to adjust this, you can see on the screen now that these particular layers are now starting to balance up and look more like the original image again. So again, this is almost like a reverse curve of this once we actually adjust it finally, but it allows me to balance that up and give it so that when we do get this cylinder engraved and put on the press, it should print more like the image that we had originally. So as the last part of this session, I wanted to really just take a quick look at a process that we call halftone screening. Now, halftone screening is the crucial process actually for making these separated layers engraver ready, and it really is the process which splits the tones of these layers down into something which can be printed on one of those cylinders that we saw at the start of the session. As it stands at the minute, we have obviously some really nice tonal movement going on through all of these separated layers, but this particular tonal movement can't be just transferred into one of those cylinders. It needs to be broken down into very specific dot patterns which simulate the tonal movement of the actual layer itself, but allows the layer to be physically like a solid layer. So it's a process of very small round dots, sometimes different patterns, which are flat in colour, the same colour as the layer, but simulate the dots themselves actually change size and simulate the actual tonal movement once it's actually pressed onto the actual substrate itself with the cylinder. So I'm going to take a look at the black layer first on its own, just to give you an idea of how this works. So we can see the tonal movement on the black layer here. Now if I go to the halftone screen, I get a little window that comes up. It shows me the repeat size. So I've got 32 by 64 here. We've got XY resolutions here, which generally represent the output resolution of the actual engravers themselves. So we've got that at a gravure set 508 dpi. We've also got the angle and frequency of the actual dot shape, which can actually be changed here. So we're going to stick with round, but there are various different dot shapes that can be used there as well. The angle is the actual angle which the dot is formed, and each of the individual layers will have its own angle so that we don't get any clash of those dots in there. The frequency is also to do with the actual tightness of the dot and the size of the dot itself. So in order to sort of show you how this goes, we're going to go at an angle of 50 LPI, but it could be a lot higher, it could be sort of somewhere in between as well. We've got various options here. We can also save these settings as well to use later, and what we'll see appear there at the bottom here is a single screened image, which, as you can see, is actually mimicking the tonal movement of the physical black layer, but it's also, in fact, what I'll do is I'll split the screen here just so we can see that a little bit easier. So there's it gone, there we go. So there, and if we look at the actual layer on the black layer on this side, we can see this is physically mimicking that tonal movement there. So what we can do here is we can then save that for engraving. So in that layer, the new layer itself, has actually become a 1-bit layer, so it's now solid and it's ready to be engraved on the cylinder. And we will go through all the layers in turn and create our engrave ready cylinders in this way. Well, I hope that short presentation has given you some great insight into the methods and workflow and powerful tools we have in AVA to help you with your preparation for designs for conventional print. And thank you very much for joining us today.